The part we'll focus on is this $350 billion commitment to state, tribal, territorial governments through coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. And so what Treasury's done, and this is on their website, we've got a link to it on this slide, there's sort of a dollar amount that's associated with every sort of type of these governments of all sizes all across the country. So that's definitely worth taking a look at. We've got some of the aggregates here. $65 billion is just going to county governments, and that's county governments of all sizes. For municipalities, so non-county local governments, the sort of the size differentiation is under 50,000 and over 50,000. So under 50,000, $19.5 billion, and over just shy of $46 billion. Next slide, Dan. So many governments have already sort of received half of the money that they've been sort of allocated under the rescue plan. So for all local government types, they're going to get sort of 50% of the money that they're entitled to upfront, and then the second 50% about 12 months later. For most states, that's going to be the case, except there are a couple states that got 100% of their funding up front just because of their unemployment numbers. But a lot of the money's sort of gone out already. It started in May for smaller local governments, so local governments under 50,000. Their funding from Treasury, which is passed through states, should be starting to get allocated this month. We're hoping that gets that sort of gets to everybody that's applied this month or shortly thereafter. The numbers that Treasury reported sort of in late May was that they'd allocated over $100 billion of that $350 billion, and given sort of they're only doing 50% for many types of governments, they had allocated by sort of like mid to late May, more than 50% of what was owed to about 1,500 state and local governments, tribes, territories across the country. So hopefully they're moving on that pretty quickly. Next slide. So what's eligible? Now that these state and local governments are getting these dollars to assist in their pandemic response, how can they use it? And the buckets that we're focusing on are kind of the ones that are specifically relevant to ICC's community development solutions, products, and services. And those kind of fall into two buckets that are spelled out in the American Rescue Plan. The first sort of has to deal with costs that are necessary to respond to the public health emergency. And that's kind of like a really broad phrase. There's Treasury guidance that's on Treasury's website, and we'll have links to this in the presentation. What Treasury has said sort of that phrase refers to, among other things, is that it picks up funding uses that were eligible previously under the CARES Act. And funding uses previously under the CARES Act included sort of costs associated with telework for the public sector. And so that picked up things like code department hardware and software investments for remote work and remote access to processes as well. So those were eligible activities under the CARES Act, and based on the Treasury guidance with respect to the American Rescue Plan, those should continue to be eligible expenditures under the American Rescue Plan. The other sort of piece that governments could take a look at is this sort of language, the provision of government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue due to the pandemic. And so what that's saying, and that's a mouthful, is if you were to look sort of at your budget or your revenue the year prior to the pandemic, so prior to January 2020, and then you sort of assume sort of a growth rate, or there are ways that you could customize the growth rate, and there's Treasury guidance on this, and then you compare it against how your government did in the following year. Sort of that difference, you can use these fiscal recovery funds up to that difference in a really flexible way for the provision of government services. So that's really broad, and the use of funding for the provision of government services would absolutely capture code department software investments for remote work, for example. Next slide. So we've been talking a little bit about how, or referring back to the CARES Act, and there are sort of a lot of aspects about what's happening now that are pretty unprecedented. The CARES Act sort of was unprecedented at its time. So that was last year, provided $150 billion for state and local governments. That is sort of an incredible amount sort of injected to state and local governments at any point in time. No sort of local cost share requirement, a lot of flexibility, as opposed to what typically comes with federal grants or federal formula programs to state and local governments. And that was a lot of money, but the American Rescue Plan is more than twice that investment. Really critically, and I talked about this a little bit before, the American Rescue Plan ensures that all local governments receive funding by formula. What happened with the CARES Act is that the funding went to states and then it went to really large jurisdictions. And then Treasury sort of relied on states to pass that funding down to smaller jurisdictions, smaller counties, smaller municipalities that didn't receive the funds directly. And that happened in some states, but it didn't happen in others, and not as much was passed through as I think Congress at least had intended. And there were also instances where states sort of attached additional restrictions on the money that they did pass through to local governments. None of that has carried over to the American Rescue Plan. So the American Rescue Plan is saying counties of any size, small municipalities, larger municipalities, all have sort of funding that will be provided to them. It's not at the state's discretion, and the state, if the state is passing through the money, cannot add additional restrictions to that money. Another sort of key distinction is the way that the funding can be used through the American Rescue Plan. There's a broadening of eligible uses. So whereas under the CARES Act, there were some restrictions on sort of using funding for to cover staffing or operations, the American Rescue Plan is pretty clear that you can use funding to do rehiring and to bring operations back to pre-pandemic levels. And one last sort of distinction to mention, there's a broader window for when you can spend the money under the American Rescue Plan. It extends out to the end of 2024. But I would, in saying that, I guess I would just, I would caution sort of folks that have tuned in that there has been a lot of interest, at least sort of in DC, in pulling back some of the money that has been provided through the American Rescue Plan. There have been a couple amendments that have been introduced by sort of leadership on the Republican side. There's also sort of increased discussion among economists on whether or not the economy is in a place that sort of these commitments to state and local governments should continue to be made, or maybe that funding should be reallocated to an infrastructure plan or something like that. And I just say that to say that first, I would encourage folks to ensure that your government has applied for this money and that you're getting it. And as soon as you get your 50%, we'd really encourage you to spend down what you have as quickly as you can. Because sort of that first 50% is kind of guaranteed, but in subsequently, I mean, there could be steps taken depending on what happens with the economy to maybe claw back the second 50%, or to maybe look at the spend down rate of the first 50% before the second 50% is provided to government. So those are all, I think, reasons why, I guess if I were in your shoes, I'd be looking to spend these resources on a faster timetable than the end of 2024. Next slide, Dan. So in terms of some areas that we at the Code Council had seen were areas of interest or potential areas of interest for code departments, definitely sort of staffing and operations. I mean, when we surveyed a couple times sort of in the height of the pandemic, over sort of 2,000 responses from jurisdictions across the country, about 6 in 10 reported that they had suffered sort of budget cuts or were expecting budget cuts. And then another really important piece is that about 5 in 10 reported that they did not have the current capability to do critical aspects of their work remotely. So a significant need for software to sort of enable that remote work, and that obviously being something that's important during the pandemic when there were public health orders in effect, where a lot of work was happening remotely. And even though sort of we're in a place now where things are looking better, there are sort of hot spots across the country. There's sort of conversation about what's going to happen sort of this winter or variants. So those sort of continue to be considerations that I know that governments across the country are having. Next slide. So we've kind of talked about how the funding under the rescue plan can be used. So it can be used for some of the purposes that we've suggested, sort of enabling remote work, for example. But that doesn't mean that's how your jurisdiction will spend the funding that's been allocated to it. There are lots of different eligible uses. And it's really up to building departments, fire prevention offices to make the case that the work that your department does is really important. Your department's ability to do that work effectively is really important. And so investments that sort of enable your work and your operations are worth making. And we've kind of pulled together some of those points here. We've got a link to our talking points, but they speak to how DHS in every state across the country has viewed code officials as essential critical infrastructure workers. Which speaks to your work protecting public health and life safety, including sort of implementing public health requirements related to the pandemic, your role in disaster mitigation and disaster response, as well as your role in facilitating construction, which is vital to our economic recovery. Next slide. So in terms of next steps, sort of some suggestions on our end, definitely worth sort of figuring out, what your needs are, or sort of taking this moment to figure out what your needs are in terms of, for example, sort of hardware, software needs, assessing what the costs might be associated with that. Take a look sort of at the allocation that's provided to your local government. I mean, those numbers are up on Treasury's website, and then start a conversation with your budget department or your finance department or your county clerk. The specific point of contact for these funds is going to vary a little bit depending on where you are in the country and what your government structure looks like. But starting that conversation early to talk to them about what your needs are, what you're looking to do, what sort of information would they need from you to sort of make a compelling case, can help out. We've got some links here and it's sort of a generic email address. We are happy to be resources too in working through those questions. And then some additional suggestions just on working through sort of our purchasing process and tracking expenses, because there are reporting requirements associated with American Rescue Plan funds. Next slide. And this is my last slide. I've got my contact information on this. Also have links again to sort of the allocation specifics, depending on what sort of where you are in the country, how much you'd receive. A pretty detailed fact sheet on American Rescue Plan funding for code departments, or specifically written for code departments, our talking points, and then sort of our advocacy page with some additional resources, also links to our survey results, and some additional links relating to going virtual if that's the direction your department's working towards. So Dan, I think that's it for me.
Great, thank you, Gabe. And just for the benefit of the attendees, we're going to do a follow-up mailing, and we'll be emailing a copy of the presentation as well as, which will include all the links that you're seeing here, so that you can access all that information directly from your desktop. So you don't have to copy this or write it all down. We're going to follow up with you and provide you with the slides and the links post this WebEx session probably later today or tomorrow. So you should be getting that from us. Okay. Gabe, thanks very much. Really helpful. I don't see any questions up on the board yet, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next part of this, but you're going to stay on, correct?
Yes. Thanks, Dan.
Beautiful. All right. All right. So I'm going to move on to, I wanted to share some examples of use of CARES Act funds, which, as Gabe mentioned, will continue to be those kinds of ideas and solutions can be and will be able to be funded through the American Rescue Plan. So I wanted to share some of the things that some of our customers have done in the past year utilizing CARES Act money as part of this. But I'm from ICC Community Development Solutions. As I mentioned, we are a wholly owned subsidiary of the International Code Council. We provide community development software solutions, permitting, inspection, land management, asset management software to local jurisdictions, as well as enterprise-wide document and records management program that also incorporates business process automation, the use of forms for application purposes, the routing approval process, recording of the information, sharing it out through integrations. We support systems integration and provide customer support for all of those installations for our many customers. And of course, we provide professional development services along with all of those software products for our customers. The stories that I wanted to walk through, again, the justification for use of CARES Act funds and hence American Rescue funds really has to do with providing the ability for jurisdiction employees to work virtually, to be able to work for outside of the office while continuing to provide the service that they provide. Also providing virtual access to citizens for services, to continue to be able to operate even if the offices are shut down, so that citizens can continue to provide or get access to the services provided by the jurisdiction. Also to provide virtual access to vital information. Amazing how many communities were just not prepared for, the kind of the total shutdown and had to work through those issues. So many communities are using these funds for technology to help be able to advance that capability and the functionality. And then disaster mitigation and response. I think this is probably looking forward. The most important thing, as Gabe mentioned, we kind of don't know what's going to happen, if there's going to be another round of problems because of variants or what have you. But preparation for disaster and the ability to be able to respond to any kind of situation, is also part of what can be used. The funding can be used for. So as we go forward, I think you're going to hear more about that and the use of funds for that for those type of issues. Specific examples I want to talk about where CARES Act has been used for technology, again, is around Laserfish, enterprise document and records management for digital transformation, and our Municity cloud-based municipal software for permitting, inspections, and asset management, licensing, and so forth are all included. We've got 4 different stories. I'm going to start with the last one first because I don't have any specific slides on this, but this is really a story about disaster mitigation. The town of Barnstable, Massachusetts has engaged in a town-wide effort to digitize all of their records in order to be able to provide greater access both to employees remotely as well as citizens who might need access to the records and information. They've incorporated a Laserfish content management solution to house all of that digital information and make it available to the public. But they're actually using CARES Act funds for the digitization of the records. That's an important distinction that, because a lot of communities are still have that unstructured data, in their record departments and their record files, and it's not digitized. It's not available other than to go back in the vault and find it. So there are communities that are using CARES Act funds, have used CARES Act funds for that function in order to mitigate future disaster and be able to respond more effectively to it. The first story I want to share with in a little more detail is the city of Tucson, Arizona. Tucson actually had a new CIO, Chief Information Officer, joined their operation just a few months before the pandemic hit. And he had already decided that he wanted to pursue an enterprise-wide document and records management solution. But as the pandemic hit, he was unfortunately traveling at the time when it really came down, was stuck in Pennsylvania because of a death in the family, but managed this whole process remotely from that location for the city of Tucson. But they went ahead and acquired the enterprise solution for Laserfish, working with our company. and used CARES Act funding as the resource to acquire it because they had an objective of providing greater access to online processes and provide greater transparency to the need for information and resources. So they launched several programs once we stood up the system. Probably the biggest and most notable was what they call the Community Wireless Program. They also put a large number of their online permit applications online so that citizens could more easily access the permit process. And they also replaced 120 paper or read-only electronic forms with the Laserfiche forms with automated workflow on the system, again, to create greater access to business process for citizens as well as internal employees. The Community Wireless Program was a public-private partnership to provide internet access to lower income residents of the city. Working through the pandemic, one of the big calls was, a lot of people just simply didn't have access to the internet. So the city and the city officials worked with local wireless providers to create a program where they would provide access as well, and the needed equipment to make that access possible to those families in the city of Tucson. But the whole process was set up for the application, for the review, for coordination with private internet providers, the tracking of the equipment needs and delivery, and then tracking renewals, which I have in place for next year, is all being handled and done through the Laserfiche forms, workflow, business process automation tools within Laserfiche. And this is a sample of the form that sits on the city's website. This is an example, but this process is set up, and this is just one part of the business process that was set up for this. But the application leads to review and approval process. The applications are then tracked from start to finish, all through, and reports are generated to ascertain program effectiveness, which has been going on for several months now. And then, of course, you have the way that they can look at the results. This was just downloaded a couple days ago, but they've had over 2,300 requests, or nearly 2,300 requests, and most of those have been completed through the process with access. So they have the ability through this tool to be able to do all of that, manage all that communication, and it's all done electronically, seamlessly using the Laserfiche process. And then they also, as I mentioned, the Planning and Development Services Department that does all the permitting, land management functionality, also put all of their online applications for permits into the Laserfiche Forms program, and then integrated that with their permitting and land management software. Again, the idea was they wanted to provide the fastest way for citizens, contractors, and so forth to be able to access the building department and get permits to keep business going as well as they possibly could, without people having to come into the office or communicate through email or what have you. So this was set up. We're managing the whole process through that and built the integration with the land management software. Another example, and this is a little bit different because they actually, Oneida County, New York, already had Laserfiche when the pandemic broke out, but not long after, the state mandated that there needed to be a more close tracking of COVID cases. They had to manage contact tracing, with citizens and be able to report all this back to the state, as well as things like quarantine reporting. And then ultimately, when the vaccines were starting to roll out, they had to manage the immunization of application and tracking process. So for each of those areas, what they asked us to do, we worked with the county. We put up forms online that were accessible via the county website for all of these purposes. And you can see this is an example of the intake process for the COVID cases. And then we also had daily symptom reporting. So if somebody was in quarantine, They were able to submit on a daily basis, what the symptoms were and track all of that information back to the county. But with what's important to note here is that when the need for the form was identified, we were able to work with the county and have this up and working on their website within 48 hours. It's a very easy tool to use. And again, back to that whole mitigation and response, we are able to help the county be able to react and get this information tracking program in place through the use of the forms and the links online in order to be able to help them track and report all of this information. And now they're working, have been working for the last couple of months with the immunization application, where then again the need was identified and the form was up and active in less than just a couple of days, working with our team. So this is an example. Again, I think communities that are thinking about down the road, how would we work with in a disaster situation. Having the tools in place and the technology in place that allows you to be able to respond, is another justification for why, the local governments, the jurisdictions need to consider, the use of these funds to get these kinds of capabilities, if they don't already have them. The city of Anniston, Alabama is engaged in, and we're just in the process of going live with them. But they engaged to purchase a Municity building software. And it's a cloud-based software that can be accessed from anywhere on any device. So remote access for employees to be able to log in, even if they're not in the office, was important. And we also bring a terrific mobile application as well for inspectors to use to go out on site as they need to conduct inspections, and they can actually work outside the office for scheduling and so forth as well from their mobile application. But it's a permitting software that obviously tracks works with all the way from applications to permits to certification, and we cover all that basic functionality. We also provide an online. This was another big justification for the use of the CARES Act funds, was the ability for citizens to come online and see information related to violation complaints, as well as file complaints from the program. The periodic inspections are also managed through the Municity software, and landlord registration, property management as well can be managed through Municity 5. The mobile application I mentioned is a terrific program that inspectors use when they're out on site, and be able to manage those inspections, issue violations, when they're out in the field. All of that can be managed through the Municity mobile application. And then plan review process is also managed within Municity 5 using PDF documents for markup, or we're also integrated with Bluebeam should the jurisdiction need that kind of capability for plan markup. Again, I mentioned the citizen portal, the ability for constituents to be able to do property lookups to determine zones, as well as other parcel information, is part of what Municity Connect allows, as well as being able to apply for different permit types based on the need of the citizen, and working through that process and being able to monitor that, schedule inspections. All of that is possible through Municity Connect. Is payment processing as well, set up for permit applications if that's warranted. The program is built, and again, the justification for use of CARES Act funds was built around this primarily, for the citizens to be able to utilize and interact with the program, again, without having to go to the physical offices of the local jurisdiction. So another slide. I wanted to get to the newest item that we're adding and capability to our Municity software is we're integrating with inspected.com to allow for remote virtual inspections from within the Municity software. So you'll actually be able to manage a dual schedule, if you will, of on-site inspections as well as off-site inspections through inspected.com, all within the Municity software. So this is just being launched, but it'll provide the ability for our local government customers to access that and be able to conduct those remote inspections right from their desktop through the Municity software. The biggest benefit is that all of the data that's captured in that inspection is then housed as part of the inspection record within Municity. And there's just a couple of slides here to show what that looks like in terms of the process. So you can schedule the video inspection if that particular inspection is okay to be done with a virtual inspection type technology, and then it's set up and you just go through the process where the contractor or the resident whose property has an inspection on it can dial in through the application. It's on the they get a notice from the office saying, you know, there's a meeting coming up, please dial in, and they do that, and then they're connected and they can show the items, and the inspector on the jurisdiction end can provide direction as to what needs to be, what pictures need to be taken. The videotape is maintained as the process is going on, and all of the data can be then collected from the inspection, including approvals, reschedules, or what have you. That all can be managed through the RVI connection. And then all of that is captured back as part of the inspection record within Municity. So that's the overview of the products and the services that are eligible under the formerly under CARES Act and now under the ARA, the American Rescue Plan. There are other products and services from ICC listed here. This includes the ones that I've just reviewed, but also the new Digital Codes Premium, the model program for online services from ICC, third-party plan review, consulting services from ICC NTA, the Municity I mentioned, Laserfish we talked about, remote virtual inspections, and then also from General Code, another ICC subsidiary, custom local building codes, and MapLink interactive zoning codes. We have scheduled upcoming webinars for each of these areas in the next couple of months. So watch for additional webinars related to the American Rescue Plan and how it relates to each of these products and services from ICC. And here's the schedule, the way it's been laid out for those webinars, and you'll be getting more information on those as we get closer to the next one. So that concludes the overview. I wanted to see if there are any questions. James, I don't see any in the Q&A box. Do we have any? Okay. Great. Well, if nobody has any questions, that concludes. Again, we will be following up with an email with a copy of the presentation deck, as well as the links to all the resources that we identified here. We appreciate your time today, and please let us know as follow-up if you have any questions or if we can help in some way. We're happy to do that. Again, have a great afternoon, and thank you again, everyone.